over many years, following the coming to power of Deng Xiaoping in 1978, China kind of thrived under the mantra of reform and opening up, which was the slogan that he coined, and which was about the experimentation which China did to improve the lot of its people. So Deng Xiaoping is widely credited with having used the phrase in front of a party congress before he came to power. And the phrase or the expression was, I don't care if it's a black cat or a yellow cat, so long as it's a cat that catches mice. And that was widely seen as being his invitation or his exhortation to party cadres that actually, we can't go on like this and we have to embrace the use of market mechanisms, albeit within the context of a state-run system that was a one-party state, but embrace market mechanisms to be more efficient, to get wealthier, and to improve the lot of citizens. So this was the guiding light, really, of not just Deng Xiaoping, but also the presidents and premiers that followed him, pretty much until 2012. Well, it's a little bit kind of fuzzy, the timing, because in 2013, which was obviously the year after Xi Jinping came to power, there was a so-called third plenum of the party. So it's usually on this kind of political cycle of the party's meetings. The third plenum is often quite an important point in the party's 5-year cycles, where initiatives for change and discussion about reform take place. And in the third plenum, actually in 2013, there was an extensive agenda announced. And from memory now, I think it covered about 64 different sectors and 380 different initiatives which were designed to basically press on with this process of reform and opening up. But in the event, nothing really has happened of great substance. In fact, most of the reforms that were announced have either kind of withered on the vine, or they've been diluted, or they've been forgotten about, or they've just kind of laid fallow. So the problem with reform under Xi Jinping is they talk a lot about reform, but they don't mean the kind of reform that his predecessors meant by reform, and certainly not what we mean by reform. When we talk about reform, we mean that we want our institutions to be more flexible and to be more dynamic, and to improve the way in which we, produce things, and quality and so on and so forth, whether it's of labor, or whether it's companies or products or healthcare and so on. But what the Chinese call, or what under Xi Jinping China calls supply-side reforms, is not really the same kind of thing. What they mean by reform is strengthening the role of state enterprises in the economy, and they do have objectives to reduce excess capacity in things like heavy industry and coal and steel, and they do want to reduce their dependence on credit. But it's a different kind of approach to reform from what has happened before. And the reason that China is or its economy is now in a bit of a, facing a difficult period, I would say, is because whereas before it was an economy that was very dynamic, led by private sector initiatives and reform, in recent years it's become rather different. It's become very dependent on credit. I mean, it's much more dependent on credit for generating economic growth than many Western countries were in the 2000s. And this dependency actually has cost them dear, actually, because eventually you could imagine that the Chinese economy may face some kind of a crisis. We can discuss whether that's likely in an economy where the banks are all owned by the government, but that doesn't mean to say that they can escape the manifestations of this kind of dependency on credit, which they, to be fair, are trying to wean themselves away from to some degree. Anyway, you don't have to take my word for this kind of state of affairs, because Wen Jiabao, who was the premier of China before, in the previous administration, he famously said, both in, I think, 2007, before the financial crisis rolled into China, and again in 2011, before he stepped down from office, that he said that the Chinese economy had become unsustainable, uncoordinated, unbalanced. In 2016, there was a now famous article that appeared anonymously on the front page of the People's Daily. I mean, it was anonymous at the time. People speculated about who it was. Today, most people think it was the man who's coming to Washington at the end of this month to continue the trade negotiations with the US, with the White House, Liu He, who's in charge of economic and financial affairs. And his message in 2016 is, we can't go on like this. If we carry on with this addiction to debt and with this dependency on credit, we're going to end up in a bad place, and we have to kind of stop this. And none other than Xi Jinping himself said in 2017 at the 19th Party Congress that China was also unbalanced and its economy was inadequate, to use his words, to meet the people's needs for a better quality of life. So there is a recognition. I mean, this is the kind of the irony in a way about China. So as you can tell from what I've been already saying, I am a bit of a skeptic about China, but I acknowledge that, you know, they have achieved great things and still can and could achieve great things. But there is an irony in this, that the leadership, in some respects, knows exactly what the problems are, but can't really bring themselves round to addressing them, because if they did that, it would threaten the integrity and the role that they reserve and believe strongly the party should have in the country. So there's a kind of a conflict there between what you should do and what you kind of want to do. So they want to keep the party supreme and in total control of all issues of economic and social life in China, but they know that they should do things that might threaten that primacy, so they tend not to get done, as you could imagine.